Hello, this is Jeremy Gressner, principal at Scaffold Partners, and today we're going to be discussing underwriting student housing properties. I'd like to introduce Todd Niffen and Aidan Burns. Hello, Todd and Aidan.
Hello, Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. These guys are in the business development department at Corridor Ventures. Corridor has over 10 properties that are student housing under management, and they regularly do underwriting for both their own account as well as a third-party property manager and receiver. For purposes of today's discussion, we decided to divide our topics into 4 groups, starting at the macro level, at the community level, and then moving down in the second discussion to the university level, and then moving to the property itself, and then finishing finally with some line items that are specific to perhaps an underwriting model or budget. So to kick it off at the university level, Aidan, why don't we move to you?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So, one of the key things when you're underwriting a student property is that you need to have a really strong awareness and understanding of the dynamics that are in play at the local level, both, the university level, because you're underwriting the university as much as you're underwriting the actual property that you're looking at, because, the university will be the key driver for this business. So that's, one lens that you're going to look through is the university. And then, you want to understand your competitive landscape and the owner profile of, the properties that you're competing with. And finally, you need to understand at the municipality, town and city level, what their aptitude is for working with property owners and, allowing for potentially new supply. So to jump into the university level, there's certainly a number of things you need to understand about it to feel like you have confidence in your business plan. So, a couple of things you're going to want to look at the university level are enrollment trends at the subject university. Is it a growing university? Is it a university that's in decline with respect to enrollment, endowment? Investing in the physical plant of the university. These are all things that you should be aware of because you're going to be levering yourself to this university. With a student property in that market. You don't want to understand, what the typical socioeconomic profile of a student renter there is. And also, what things like meal plans cost and some other university related expenses. So, in that same vein, you're going to need to know what the existing inventory of university owned housing is, what's their forecast for building new university owned supply.
And that's all developing a relationship with the people who are at the university itself.
Yeah, it's important to develop a rapport with whoever's in charge of off-campus housing. Typically, universities will have a whole department sort of servicing the off-campus community. So you're definitely going to want to have conversations with them, develop that rapport, like I said, and make sure that you've budgeted to be listed on the university's off-campus housing marketing system. That's going to be a key component of your, marketing and advertising spend. But there are some other things with respect to the university that you need to understand, what percentage of students are living on campus versus off campus. And if there are any restrictions on off-campus living, many universities only allow juniors and seniors to live off campus or require, matriculated students to live at least 1 year on campus. So there are just some dynamics you need to be aware of that vary university to university, but this is all in the interest of understanding what the true pool of renters is for this area, this, university, because that can influence a number of things, including, the rents that you're setting in your business plan. So certainly an important thing to understand is all the dynamics that the university has in play as it relates to off-campus housing.
And the only thing I would add is this information tends to be out there. I mean, room and board prices for on-campus living are typically publicized, just because it's something that families are always looking at when they're budgeting what the college experience is going to cost. So that, along with looking at your direct competitors, which we'll touch on shortly, can help you triangulate both the rents you have in the beginning and what you think the growth you can achieve would be. And then I guess the only other thing I'd add as far as university profile is I think you want to understand whether it's a primarily undergraduate institution, whether it has a research component, because research, especially well-known research, tends to equal government grants, which makes a university kind of less dependent on tuition dollars, so they could better weather something like a COVID or something similar that would happen in the future. And it also speaks to kind of the split between undergraduate and graduate student populations, because you may be dealing with a property that has historically been more catered to graduate students, more catered to undergrads, and that is going to play into overall demand as well. But luckily, these things tend to be pretty publicly available.
Yeah, and just one other thing I'd quickly add with respect to university profile is you typically would want to be targeting universities that have kind of non-tuition revenue, whether that's through research or athletics is certainly a big component of it. Division I athletics that create revenue for the school are always going to be more attractive to agency lenders and bank lenders and really the whole lender universe. So I think we'll stop there for the university and move over to sort of the competitive landscape and understanding who your competitive property owners are. So the properties that you're competing with for renters, you want to understand whether these are well-capitalized institutions like an EDR or a big student housing owner operator with a national footprint that has resources to pivot their business plan or be a disruptor in that submarket. It's important to identify which, who owns the different properties that you're going to be competing with throughout the leasing process. So, a well-capitalized institution is more likely to be focused on growing their revenue over time and investing in the property, where, mom and pop student owner operators are really just focused on, what we call getting butts in beds and just driving occupancy as opposed to improving the property and driving rent growth. So, these are things that can influence, again, where you set your pro forma rents and the growth rates that you're using throughout your pro forma. So that's certainly an important thing to understand. You're also going to want to look for, recent trades, sale comps in this market. Are properties that have traded recently, are these sale prices that are supportive of your business plan, or, were they perhaps so far below, the price point that you may be going in at that they can afford to maintain a delta to your rents, or vice versa? If they came in and paid a real premium for the property, does that imply that, they need to grow their rents to hit their business plan targets? So, you got to kind of game that out a little bit and just have an understanding of who your competitors are. And kind of with that, where are they in their business plans? Are your competitors investing in their properties? Are they making direct unit improvements to try to grow rent? Again, these are all items that can influence your business plan and that you need to be aware of.
Did you want to cue in on the municipality itself?
Yeah, so it's kind of the third level. What we're thinking about here is understanding the municipality itself, the town or city and their local building and permitting departments. Are these folks that, are willing to work with you and are affable and will help you facilitate the improvements that you want to make on the property? Or, are they difficult to work with, and can they create delays in your business plan that, directly impact your current and target returns? You may want to, have a high level conversation with these folks during your due diligence period prior to actually transacting on the property, because, timing is really important in the student housing world. And, a building department that is unwilling to work with you can seriously disrupt your business plan. And kind of going along with that, what is the municipality and the university's aptitude for allowing new supply to come into the market? There are many cases where the municipality will do everything in its power to block new supply because they want to, maintain the residential neighborhoods in this market and not overly skew it towards student renters. So, to give a quick example, Division I university in the Northeast that we're really familiar with recently blocked a proposed new development because of wetlands and endangered salamanders. So just kind of goes to show you that some of these municipalities will do anything they can to block developers coming in, which can be a benefit to an existing property owner, but it's just something you need to understand and be aware of.
I mean, ultimately, there are places that a place is either going to view itself as a college town and that's something they want to cultivate, or they, on the other side, can view themselves as a place that essentially has to deal with the fact that they have college housing within it. And it definitely pays to understand the difference.
That's a good segue into the new supply coming into the market. Aiden, can you pick up on that?
Sure. So similar to what we talked about in the competitive landscape, because there are a finite pool of renters for student housing properties, the market's going to be highly sensitive to both rent increases and decreases, but also new supply coming online. So even a small amount of units coming into the market can apply serious downward pressure on rents just because the pool of renters is finite. And so as new supply comes online, as a property owner in that market, you need to really understand what your competitive position is, because for the most part, new supply that comes online is going to be pedestrian to campus, and it's going to be highly amenitized, which are two of the biggest factors that a student renter will kind of look for in their evaluation of where they want to rent during their college years. So if you're a property owner of an older property with minimal amenities that maybe requires getting on the bus to get to campus, overnight, that can suddenly make your property look pretty unattractive when you've got brand new stuff that's, a quarter mile from campus with a rooftop, pool and coffee shop in the lobby, just to give an example. So you need to be prepared for downside scenarios where your lease up may be interrupted by new supply or just changes in the marketplace that apply downward pressure on rent. So just being well capitalized with reserves and having a plan for those sorts of events will pay dividends for you throughout your hold period.
Great. Okay, why don't we move to the second topic on our list, understanding the university's market cycle. Aiden, can you speak to that?
Sure. So as you mentioned, the university's student housing leasing system is cyclical. It's really important to nail your lease up because you're going to essentially lock in your income statement for 10 to 12 months with most of the leases lined up to begin and roll off during the same 1 or 2 month period. So this is a lot different than a multifamily property where you may have 5 to 10 units per month rolling off, where you can then facilitate your improvements, where in the case of student housing, you're locked in for 10 to 12 months. So you need to be on top of your pre-leasing. Typically a pre-leasing season will start in kind of the first quarter of that academic year. So you don't want to be in a situation where, by May or June, you're reacting to all of your competitive set having leased up because they may have been offering concessions or they may have decreased their rents, or conversely, pre-leasing may be slow because properties have raised their rents. And it takes the market a little while to react to that. So this can vary market to market. There are certain student housing markets where everything's, pre-leased by April. Or there could be some that are slow releasing and, pre-leasing extends well into the summer and early fall. So that's just something that you need to understand and, has a great impact on, ultimately your income and NOI for that school year. So some things you can do to combat that are, again, you should be well capitalized and include some reserves in your capitalization to account for lease up risk. Because after the initial pre-lease, there really aren't that many opportunities to add to your occupancy throughout the academic year. You may have some commuter students who decide after the first semester that they'd really like to live closer to campus, or you may have some transfer students who come in and are looking for housing after the first semester. But for the most part, your income statement's locked in once your pre-lease is completed. So it's really important to stay on top of that and be aware of what your competitors are doing.
Great.
You can control where you sit in this to an extent, just based purely on the type of properties you look at and your understanding of them. And by that, I mean, I'm going to share something briefly to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. What you're looking at here is a breakdown of one of our owned assets compared to its 3 or 4 main comps, anonymized, but it's showing the floor plan breakdown that we have. And one of the reasons that we were pretty excited about this property is because we know that in this market, students are typically coming in groups looking to live together. So if you can skew toward a larger unit type, you generally can get an earlier pre-lease going. You get higher demand for units. You get people staying for more than 1 year, and you get good word of mouth advertising. So to illustrate what I'm talking about here, in this asset that we own in the Northeast, we have about 26% of our units of a 3-bedroom floor plan and up. And when you compare that to some of our main comps, some of them have, you can see here, 0 3-bed and up units. And some just have many fewer than we do. So we have typically had pretty strong and early pre-leasing at this asset because we are known as one of the assets in the market that has the larger units that people, college students that are, again, shopping in groups tend to be the most interested in. And even in our more normally, set up floor plans, i.e. a 2-bedroom, we went in, did a very deep market survey and understood that our 2-bedrooms are also larger than the standard 2-bedroom, which, some people will put an extra person in there, or, they just have more space to, spread out these students, have people over. And that has helped us, and that could help, anybody who understands the competitive market well to get quicker pre-leases, get more guaranteed pre-leases, and be able to push their rents a little bit more aggressively. Because ultimately, it's demand that drives that.
Reputation is extremely important in the student housing world. I would say more so than in multifamily, simply because, like I've been talking about, you have a finite pool of renters who are all, tied to the same driver, being the university, and word of mouth spreads really quickly. So you need to make sure that from an operating standpoint, you're budgeting for, the correct level of staffing, the correct level of contract services, the correct level of repairs and maintenance, because if you're operating on a shoestring budget and you're cutting costs by ignoring, work orders or understaffing your property, word is going to spread very quickly that this is not a great place to live for a student. I know in the case of the university I attended, there's a Facebook group that's dedicated to off-campus housing, and students are constantly talking in that group about where are the best places to live. So, you really can't shortchange the operating expenses at all. And you need to make sure that, you're operating these properties to the highest level standard that's possible.
Great. Why don't we use that as a segue to move into the property itself, stabilized versus value add. Todd, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So similar to normal multifamily, you could be going in with a strategy of simply acquiring an asset that's mostly stabilized and continuing to operate it, put money into it as required, but without any major value add plans built into at least the first couple of years, which is totally fine. It's a legitimate strategy that happens all the time. Higher returns, just like in multi, are typically going to be found where you can go in and fix something, go in and cure deferred maintenance, or go in and update units that haven't been updated in a long time. Of course, that's going to require different capital assumptions up front. But getting into that, or before getting into that, I should say, because of the unique timing cycles that college properties have that Aiden was talking about, you need to consider your, cash flow and cash position in the context of the work you want to do. A stabilized property would probably run 12-month leases, for example. So you have 12 months of known cash flow that you can depend on. You can pay your distributions out of, and you can service your debt off of. However, you have to keep in mind that in a normal multifamily, you would do renovations when a unit became vacant. Well, if you're signing 12-month leases where this is where the student lives, then you need to consider that for the value add, the units you've identified as as the source of your value add, you're gonna have to get access to those, and you're gonna have to get access to those in kind of a non-typical way, which is typically to do a shorter term lease, call it a 10 or 11-month term lease. I'm gonna pull up a cash flow illustration to bring my point home here, this is an illustration of a value add strategy that's being executed where you have to kind of artificially drop your cash flow, choose to drop your cash flow for a couple months in the summer because you know further down the line, it allows you to go in and grow your rents. So you can see, this is just a hypothetical that we ran on one of our assets, but you can see from the spring semester, strong, normal, typical cash flow, normal revenue, normal expenses, which leads to cash flow at the end of the day. However, when you come into the summer months, in this scenario we were discussing, significant drops in revenue and therefore cash flow because we had decided that potentially doing these value add renovations would be helpful. So you can see that you end up with a negative cash flow situation during your summer. Now, if this is a stabilized asset, that's probably a cause for concern. But if you're coming in and understanding that you're going to run a couple summers of negative cash flow, and going back to what Aiden said in the beginning, you are capitalized with enough cash to A, pay for the renovations, and B, continue to pay your lender and pay your distributions, then this negative cash flow is not a problem if it's part of your plan. The problem comes up when it's not a part of your plan. So it goes to lease up, it goes to lease timing, and it goes to just being ready to absorb those things so you can get to the higher rent future where you're getting a return on those dollars. Your cash position is still comfortable because you were ready to absorb a couple of months of negative cash flow.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add to that you may even want to reserve, capitalize the deal with some reserves for sort of emergency unit renovations, in the event that you have an unsuccessful or subpar lease up where you have maybe 20 units that you just simply weren't able to fill. You want to have the flexibility and the capital to potentially make improvements to those units to make them more appealing in the next lease up cycle. So that's one way that you can combat a subpar leasing season is to, take stock of why you were unable to lease up the property. And perhaps that might guide you towards, hey, I need to invest in these units and make them more appealing to renters in order to get the target occupancy that I'm looking for.
And it all starts with a good understanding of how your units sit compared to the competitive set. And, we talked about floor plans before, but now I'm kind of talking about the physical asset. So, another illustration I'll pop up here is, this was from one of our deals that we were looking at, the before pictures of units. So, we went in, took a lot of pictures, understood how things were, understood that cabinets were quite old, appliances were quite old, flooring was very tired, the carpet that was being used was just not something that's going to drive premiums, not something that's going to make a renter choose one thing over another. So we went in and did some very precise budgeting on what we could afford and what the target that made sense looked like. Not over improving because we're dealing with a student asset, and also not over improving compared to renovated peers, and arriving at a budget that made sense for that. So if these are the befores, a renovated bathroom that looks like this compared to the previous one. Now, for these walls, they look great and they present really well, but it's just paint. Moldings, we just painted them, but they look good, they present well. We identified that the thing that people pay the most attention to, because they were looking at it the most, was a vanity, a toilet, and a shower, and some good lighting. So we kept a decent amount, made it look better, added and spent significant dollars on things that, we knew that, again, people looked at the most and they spent the most time interacting with, and realized that something like this after product was very competitive with our comps, but also something that was affordable, based on the overall both rents we could get and premiums we could get over old. Flooring wasn't bad, but it certainly did not scream that money had been spent on the product. And, at the end of the day, we did this transition on a fairly reasonable budget, but it had a major impact. And we with a good understanding of what the other kind of competitive bathrooms look like in the market, we knew that it would be, we would get a decent, high teens, low 20% return on every incremental dollar we invested on a value add project like that. And we also were ready for the fact that something like that, bathroom work, you can't do that when somebody's in place. We knew that was going to have to happen over the summer. So we were also prepared for a couple of months of negative cash flow in these summers because it yielded solid returns. And then that unit going forward can go back on 12-month leases rather than having to force, 10 or 11 months to get that work done.
Great. Good. Why don't we move on to the last item we wanted to speak about today, which are the catch-all budget items, sort of the line items. Todd, can you also take that for us?
Yeah, so I want to jump back to something Aiden said in the beginning. You could certainly acquire a Class A brand new built pedestrian campus stabilized asset built by, one of the household name student housing developers. And that the financials that they were operating on are going to be fairly accurate for what you would be having to spend on your operating expenses on a go-forward basis. If you want to get into the value add space, you really need to try to understand the best you can what kind of shortcuts the old ownership was taking, whether you can take those or whether it would be too damaging to the property's reputation for you to continue to do that. And you just need to come in with a totally different expense structure. So I'll pull up another quick exhibit here, a comparison of T12, so seller's financials versus what we underwrote in the beginning for our first couple of years on an acquisition we made. So two things should really jump out to everybody here. One is that there was zero marketing dollars. And Aiden talked about this earlier. I mean, paying whatever needs to be paid to get onto the student or the university databases is critical, plus whatever other normal advertising you'd have to use. So we knew immediately we could not underwrite going forward zero marketing dollars, just wouldn't work. So, we did some research and put in a dollar amount, and we continuously go back to that to make sure that we're spending our marketing dollars well. Another thing that should jump out is zero contract services. So $0 spent maintaining landscaping, maintaining, exteriors, paint, things like that, snow removal. This property was essentially doing snow removal on its own, which it's easy to say you can do that. It's a lot harder to actually execute that. We knew we had to put money in there, and this property is in the Northeast, so we had to spend a significant amount of money. And just, a few other items, general and admin, we essentially doubled it because we know from our experience, and as Aiden said, that staffing is critical here. I mean, a community manager at a student property is not just sitting and answering the phone. They are doing everything that a normal multifamily community manager does, but also managing the personalities of students, managing very difficult lease up times because, instead of leasing up 8 to 10% of your property every month throughout the year, you're essentially leasing up 100% of your property in 3 to 5 months. That's a lot. I mean, that does not come free. So you can see our payroll went up and our general and admin went up to reflect the fact that we value good personnel. And we know that we make the most money on these things by having a really well-capitalized office organization and employee organization. You can see there's some other things where we were able to underwrite some savings, but in general, we're not going to do that because it's potentially dangerous to convince yourself that you're smarter than the last owner. You may be, but you need to give yourself a couple of years to prove that rather than assuming it's going to happen, at the drop of a hat. Just because there's no fairy dust that gets sprinkled at the closing table because you're now the owner.
Right. And I think all of this sort of just goes back to having the right management partner for these projects. You want someone who's deeply experienced in student housing and has an understanding of, the idiosyncrasies of this particular student market, because to think you can, operating a student property is a much different beast than operating a traditional multi-property. And you need to think about that when selecting your management partner.
Good. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I've been speaking with Todd Niffen and Aidan Burns from Quarter Ventures. We spoke today about underwriting a student housing property. We started at the macro level, talking about the university environment, the municipality the university is in, and then we moved down to the university market cycles, from there to the property itself, and then Todd just recently just touched on some budget items. So thank you guys for helping me today with this webinar. And if you have any questions about what we've been talking about today or facing any challenges, please reach out.